Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Julianne and today I'm going to be reflecting on my past 6 months of reading. So at the start of 2021 I set myself a very ambitious goal. I set myself a goal to read 200 books this year. How is it going? I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I'm still doing pretty well. I've read over 40 books. In the progression of my goal though, not so well, because that means that I have, like 140 books left to read this year in order to hit my target. To be fair, I haven't read many comics this year. Last year I got pretty far towards 200 because I read a lot of comics. And I'm sure I'll read more comics later in the year and catch up a little bit that way. But I'm not sure that I'm going to make the 200. I don't think it's likely. I think there's just too much other stuff going on in my life. I'm spending too much time writing, etc. Gardening, all kinds of other things that I'm doing instead of reading. However, 200 is my ultimate goal. Like that is the goal that I would like to set for each year for the rest of my life. So I'm not going to change it. I'm going to leave it where it is, and I'm just going to see where I go, where I land, really. And then have a think about what I can do next year to improve and that kind of thing. So I'm pretty chill about it. I'm not feeling an urgency to reach that goal. I'm not worried about it. If I don't hit it, I don't hit it as a learning experience. And you know, I have a full-time job. I think if I didn't have a full-time job, if I was able to work part-time or to write for a living, then I would have a lot more time for reading, because when I write, I need to read a lot more in order to fuel the writing, so that would necessarily have to be part of my creative practice. So yeah, I think it's just a symptom of my life and the way it is now. But yeah, I'm going to leave that as my ultimate goal. So moving on, I wanted to talk about my favourite books that I've read in the last 6 months, the best books, in my opinion. And this is really hard because I've read some really good books this year, and I wanted to get the list down to 10. So I brought them all up in Goodreads and I picked out my favourites, and there were about 20. So I had to kind of play them off against each other and think, okay, was this one better than this one? And it's sort of it's not a very straightforward process, because there are some times where I really loved a book, but I don't necessarily think it was better than another book. It just happened to be that it really suited my mood at the moment. There are times when I know objectively a book was brilliant, but I wasn't quite in the mood for it. There was a bit of a mismatch there. So yeah, I just did the best I could. I've read a lot of good books this year, so if it didn't make it to this list, doesn't mean I didn't love it. These are just the ones which, you know, sparked joy the most, to borrow a phrase from Marie Kondo. So first on this list is one of the first books I read this year, and that is Beginners by Tom Vanderbilt, which is actually a non-fiction book, and it's basically about the joy of lifelong learning. And the author is clearly quite a privileged man, because he can hire tutors for kinds of things, and I don't imagine his publisher paid for him to do this. But basically, inspired by his daughter taking up new skills, he decides to investigate the whole process of learning new skills as an adult. And even though I cannot afford to hire tutors to teach me all of these different things and I don't have the time for it, I still found it really inspiring, because he goes and he talks to people who research the psychology of learning and gives some useful tips. There's also advice you can get for specific skills. So things that he learns in the book are chess, juggling, surfing, singing, and drawing, I think. Yeah. So if you're interested in any of those areas, I think it's worth picking it up. It doesn't go into enormous detail about these topics, it's just like a few tips. So if you're just starting out in any of those subjects, you might get a few things on this book. But it's also just really inspiring and uplifting, because it shows that you don't have to stop learning when you're an adult. You can keep going forever, which is something that is really heartwarming for me because I absolutely love learning. It's one of my favourite things in the world. I want to learn something new every single day. But of course I do find it hard to learn some new skills, and this book just, yeah, it helped put me in the mindset that all I've got to do is keep trying and I can succeed. You know, maybe I won't become the most expert singer in the history of the world, but keeping going to choir and practicing in other ways can help me improve. And yeah, lots of other things like that. And before I move on, I got my copy of Beginners from NetGalley. The second book on this list is a comic, one of the few that I've read this year, and that is the first in the Gem and the Holograms series by Thompson and Sophie Campbell. I love this series, but I picked the first one in particular because I adore Sophie Campbell's art. I feel like it imprinted on me, and then even though the art in the rest of the series is objectively good, it just wasn't the same. It wasn't the same. I just really loved the way that she drew all of the characters and brought them to life. And yeah, I just loved it. I just loved it. So Gem and the Holograms is a kind of a comic mini series, I guess. It's not very long. I don't know if they're making more of them. But it's basically inspired by the I think it's 1980s cartoon series Gem and the Holograms, which is about a couple of rival girl groups and also like a sci-fi artificial intelligence and secret identity and stuff like that. It's really, really fun. I don't think you need to have seen the show to enjoy the comic, although if you did see the show, I think that you will absolutely adore reading it. The next book, just checking my phone, is a Christmas book, and that is A Perfect Paris Christmas by Mandy. I am fast becoming a huge fan of Mandy. I've read 2 of her books and I want to read all of the rest, even the ones that in theory don't appeal to me so much, like the summer holiday ones. I'm a Christmas romance person. You know, I just want to read them because it's her and I love the way she writes. So A Perfect Paris Christmas is about a young woman who had a organ transplant, and she is contacted by the mother of the organ donor who wants to meet her. So she goes to Paris to meet her. Little does she know that she's the co-owner of a hotel chain, and she also meets one of the other co-owners, who is of course a handsome man, who is into her from first sight, but has had a dark past of his own, and is kind of conflicted about his feelings. He's always been somebody to try to avoid attachments, except to his best friend, who was the organ donor. And yeah, it's a wonderful mix of family drama and personal development and of course romance. And yeah, I just loved it. It was a very Christmassy book as well, because it's all about decorating these hotels for Christmas, and it's just, yeah, it's festive, it's lovely. I would really recommend it. The next book is Rescue Me by Sarah Manning, who is one of my favourite authors ever. So when I saw this on NetGalley, I just had to request it and I was delighted to be approved. Rescue Me is inspired by her own experience adopting a dog, and is about 2 people who end up co-parenting a Staffordshire Bull Terrier called Blossom, who brings joy and terror and a whole new way of seeing the world into their lives, and creates so much havoc and so much love and brings them both together, but also highlights tensions and differences between them that they have to work out. And oh my god, I cannot emphasize enough how lovely this book is. When I finished reading it, I wanted to start it over again immediately, which I feel is like some of the highest praise that I can possibly give a book. The next book on the list is another comic, Strong Female Protagonist by Brennan Lee Mulligan and Molly Ostertag. So this is originally a webcomic, and I read volume 1 of the kind of collections, which was available on my library to download. So I think the best way to describe this is kind of like a series that deals with all of the kind of like questionable morality of the existence of superheroes, but without being really bleak and depressing. So there's some dark stuff in there, but overall the tone is upbeat, unlike with The Boys where it's crushing misery. So if you kind of liked the ideas in The Boys but not so much the execution, or the way that it just kind of sucks you down into a negative spiral, then this is definitely one to check out. I'm talking from personal experience here with The Boys. I could not watch more than one episode a day because it was just so much of a drag. So much of a drag. But this is kind of the opposite in tone. So it's about a young woman who is a retired superhero. She's just decided to stop being a superhero and go to university. Of course, she still has all her powers, which leads her to be in some tricky situations and get targeted by various people. And she ends up, despite her best efforts, being drawn into an intriguing plot to find out kind of what's going on with the superheroes, why bad things are happening to some of them. And that's where it kind of gets a bit dark. But as I say, it still maintains its upbeat tone, which I really admired. Next up is How to Be Autistic by Charlotte Amelia Poe, which is a memoir about the author's experiences growing up as an undiagnosed autistic person, and how that has impacted their entire life and how they came to know who they are and grow to be a bit more at peace with it. And this was just like, wow. Reading this book was so close to my own experiences at school in a lot of ways. I felt, wow, there for the grace of God go I. And yeah, there's not really much else to say other than that. It's quite a quick read, but it can be quite difficult in places, so I'll just warn you of that. If you have trauma related to authority figures not taking you seriously, or kind of going along with bullying and that kind of thing, like, you may find this a really, really tough read. I did. But yeah, I would strongly recommend it all the same. Next up on the list is a 2-for-1, and that is A Dangerous Remedy and the sequel, Monstrous Design by Kat Dunn. This is a beautiful Illumicrate edition. I was also given a proof copy of this by the publisher, and I had access to Monstrous Design via NetCully. This is a series about the Battalion of the Dead, a group of young people in mid-revolutionary France who have decided to kind of make a business out of rescuing people from the guillotine. They kind of do this to stick middle fingers up at the authority figures of the revolution, but also for cash. But then they kind of get drawn into this complicated plot about a young woman with mysterious abilities, and discover that there's something else really big at stake here. And it's just fabulous. There's a lot of found family vibes and conflicted feelings about romantic partners and all kinds of stuff. There's responsibility and friendship and dealing with the crimes of one's parents and the mistakes of one's parents. There's just so many different issues and interesting ideas explored here, and I would really recommend them. As I said in my June wrap-up, I am somebody who's really interested in the probably quite boring details of what happened after the end of the Hunger Games and any other story about a revolution or the overthrow of authority. I want to know how they built a better society, how they dealt with the awful things that happened during the process of that revolution, what the psychological effects were, all of that kind of stuff. I want to know the details. So these books being set in the middle of all that going on is really, really interesting for me, and it also makes for a lot of fun action, so I'm really looking forward to reading third. Next on the list is An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green, which I got at the UK book launch. This is just so much fun. It's about a young woman who discovers a mysterious robot that has just appeared on her way home from work, and then it turns out all of these robots And then it turns out there are robots all over the world in different cities. There's some kind of big mystery here. Is it an art project? Is it governments? Or is it aliens? And it seems pretty clear that it's probably aliens. And yeah, she just gets drawn into this whole mystery with all these people working together, and she becomes kind of like a spokesperson for the robots and all the people who are pro-robot. It's just such an interesting concept. I'm really looking forward to reading the sequel. Next up is First of Two Romances, and the second to last book on this list is Black Sheep by Georgette. Content warning, lots of colonialism, because it's a Regency romance about the very posh and rich people in the society. So ignoring all of that stuff, as one does when one reads a Georgette book, this was really, really fun. It's about a woman who basically wants to break up her heiress niece and the man she's become attached to, who is blatantly a fortune hunter, who just wants her for her money. And how she sets out to do this is by trying to convince his uncle, who's just come to town, to help her out with it and to put him off. But he doesn't really give a crap about any of this, but he is really into her. So it kind of progresses in a slow and frustrating way for our heroine, but she gets to know this man and she finds herself irresistibly becoming drawn to him, and it's really, really fun. The dialogue is fabulous and I very much enjoyed it. And finally, the last book on this list is Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert, which is a modern contemporary romance about a woman with a chronic illness who has a near-death experience and decides that she's finally going to move out of her family home and set herself a list of things that she wants to do in order to get a life. Along the way, she recruits the superintendent of her building, who is of course a very attractive man, to help her out with some of these tasks, and of course they end up becoming very, very attracted to each other and romance happens, and it's just so much fun, and yeah, just kind of like a breath of fresh air in the midst of more heavy going reading, and I loved it and I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the series. So those were my favourite books read during the first 6 months of this year. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these, if you have any recommendations? What is that? Recommendations for me based on the books that I have loved. If you would like to read more books but don't know where to start, check out my free course, Ignite This Passion for Reading, Fall in Love with Books, which is linked in the description box below. If you would like a quick read as well to boost your reading challenge total, check out my free novella, Unlucky in Lockdown, which is set during the first 2 weeks of the first UK lockdown for COVID-19. There's been so many of them now. Which is about flatmates who don't like each other very much but are forced to learn to get along when they're stuck inside together for so much time. Thank you so much for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you'd like to see more from me, and you'll see me again soon. Bye!